Hello, Professor McGuff. This is my video report for the book Deviant Bodies that was assigned as my book group book. I'm going to start by explaining a main idea of this book, and then I will elaborate upon it. Also, I am going to read from a script a bit because I am not a fantastic orator. The idea of this book is that bodies are a source of human identity and the labeling of them is formed extrinsically, regardless of their accuracy via scientifically backed processes. This labeling and constructing of bodies forms perceptions that pervade society over generations and have major social and historical implications for our current and our future generations of society. To label bodies as normal or healthy or disabled is at best an echo of what that body's true form is, and unfortunately can be an inaccurate representation based on the labeler's knowledge of what they think that body is. Bodies have been and will continue to be constructed by society to fit into pre-designed roles. I am going to discuss, for my first point, which is the construction of female bodies, I'm going to talk about Chapter 1, the Hottentot Woman of Europe, Chapter 4, The Norm Which Is Not One, and Chapter 10, The Anthropometry of Barbie. To begin with a quote from Chapter 1, it can be found on page 22. From the start of the scientific revolution, scientists viewed the earth or nature as female, a territory to be explored, exploited, and controlled. Newly discovered lands were personified as female, and it seems unsurprising that the women of these nations became the locus of scientific inquiry. These chapters reveal male-dominated thinking about the female sex. It constructs the female body as deviant due to its physical differences and perceived psychological weaknesses. Deviation from what was considered normal, white male heterosexual, needed explanation. And so, comparisons of anatomy were then, at that time, considered a scientific approach to discovering the why of these physical differences. For example, if certain physical features were observed, the body was considered inferior. Take Sarah Bartman, the Hottentot Woman of Europe. She was considered to be more closely related to an orangutan than a human just because of her facial and body features. Another example is pain tolerance. If pain tolerance was considered above a certain threshold, was measured above a certain threshold, it was scientifically considered that the women were likely to be prone to criminal activities. As an example, Lombroso's algometer, which was a measurement of the response or the lack of response to women when they were electrically stimulated in regions of their genitalia. The less reaction they had, the more prone to criminality they were. These early approaches to the female body form the basis of society's current perception of the female body. Though the method in which early male scientists tried to prove the differences between male and female have altered in their form, the current construct of what is considered a proper female body is still heavily influenced by the anatomical differences and expectations pioneered by white heterosexual men. Barbie is a prime example of the modern construction of the proper female form. Barbie's modern-day feminist position of encouraging girls to strive to be what they want and believe in themselves, and to believe that they are equals in society, is completely belied by the fact that the anatomical appearance of Barbie has changed very little since its debut. Her appearance still, as it did then and now, advertises how a woman should look, think, and act according to the world of men. To illustrate this issue, I am going to read a quote from Chapter 10 on page 281. Perhaps what makes Barbie such a perfect icon of late capitalist constructions of femininity is the way in which her persona pairs endless consumption with the achievement of femininity and the appearance of an appropriately gendered body. Constructs of deviant bodies appear in many forms, from what is considered an acceptable example of a member of society, Barbie, to the construction of forms that are unacceptable to society and therefore need to be removed. Sarah Bartman, Jewish people in Nazi Germany. Which brings me to the next point I'd like to discuss is based on Chapter 6, The Destruction of Lives Not Worth Living, which is a chapter about the construction of ethnicity and physical disability. I will begin with a quote from that chapter found on page 170. A paraphrased quote. Ethnic and physical deviance were linked through a logic that traced the inferiority of both groups to deficiencies in their physical bodies. These groups were cast as parasites living off the productive lives of others. Nazi Germany is notoriously known for its concentration camps and methodological killing of those determined to be useless to society and therefore unworthy of life. This included not only the Jewish populace, but also that of the mentally ill, the handicapped, and the homosexual. What began as a program to reduce spending and increase economic efficiency by reducing the costs of care on those dependent on others for survival, evolved into what was seen in Nazi Germany as a successful campaign to create a genetically hygienic population. People became frightened of living in a dirty gene pool through the slander and propaganda and faulty scientific knowledge of this era. Propaganda pertaining to the disabled, diseased, ethnically diverse, and one's sexual orientation constructed ideas within society that the people who fit those particular labels needed to be removed for the betterment and preservation of mankind. For example, using hygiene as a pretext, Jews were confined to the unsanitary and dangerous ghettos. And once there, much to their detriment, they were physically forced through their environment to become prime examples of a diseased population and therefore could be seen as needing to be removed. To quote from a book titled Disability, a Life Course Approach that I think reflects this idea, is as follows. It is not biological differences that need to be removed from the world, but disabling barriers. It is not disabled lives that harm, but disabling societies, such as Nazi Germany. While Jewish lives were constructed as a hygienic concern, the lives of the mentally disabled, and as well as the diseased, were constructed as an economic concern. Euthanasia was seen as a cost-saving measure and a space-saving measure, especially in preparation for cleaning out the hospital beds that the handicapped and diseased were occupying during World Wars I and II. These ideas of a clean gene pool and economic savings have coursed throughout history. For example, in many past societies, infanticide was considered permissible for various reasons, for deformities, ritual sacrifice, and economic hardship. Those societies over time have become more educated and capable of caring for dependent individuals. Genocide, infanticide, genetic cleansing, euthanasia, or any other label it is put to still exist even in modern societies. Some countries, the United States included, permit or have relatively recently permitted the death of constructed bodies, but use different labels. For example, infanticide has evolved into abortion, genocide evolved into the enslavement of African Americans, and the controversial Death with Dignity Act has evolved as a form of self-directed euthanasia. Also, the death penalty parades as a form of hygienic cleansing, removing those that are considered unsavory characters from society. Though we consider ourselves as educated, we still seem to take old ideals, polish them up, and then give them a new label. Which brings me to my third and final point. What role does education play in a democratic society? After reading this book, I'm starting to think that education plays dual roles in a democratic society. Working in the field of education, I have expectations of what education will bring people. I have the expectation that education will have positive outcomes for people. But I have found that it can also mislead people, as is seen in many examples of the book Deviant Bodies. Education is the great humanitarian reformer. It's the devil's advocate. It serves to teach. It serves to enable us to learn from our mistakes. It also serves to provide society with an informed populace. Education serves democracy in that it creates a platform on which to build our ideals and beliefs that serve to support the majority and, at times, serve to quench the rebellions of the minority. Education serves to prevent violence and destruction of society through the removal of ignorance, and at the same time serves to make change slower and harder to come by, but generally more durable and sustainable in the long run. Education is a great equalizer in a democratic society. You can go far and make a successful place for yourself. Education can be a great manipulator. If you can control what is taught, then you can shape the thinking of future generations. Think standardized testing and standardized curriculum in school. Or consider the perceptions created in the various bodies as described in this book by using science and education as a rationale. This book describes Western and modernized societies and how these societies construct bodies of discrimination. It makes me wonder, do other societies do this? Do they construct similar bodies of discrimination? Or is this a Western thing? Is this a modern society thing? Or is this a human race thing? And that is my review and reflection. Thank you.